Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have Mark Killmer back with us again this week. As you learned last week, if you were here, he has an amazing background in teaching, preaching, counseling for couples, for marriages, for singles, everybody. He has an amazing background. He's especially known to us at Montview this year because he taught some classes in contemplative studies. I can speak personally that they were amazing, and provided that chance during a busy week to sit down and connect with our spiritual sides. It was really lovely. I'm so glad he's here again this week. Please join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. Mark Killmer.
Good morning. It's nice to see some folks back from last week. It's always a little encouraging when people come back for a second dose. I learned from Clover's sermon last week that it's a blessing when men can't speak. So I thought maybe we'd spend 50 minutes in silence, but I think I'll go ahead and speak. About 5 or 6 summers ago, I had the opportunity to visit the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City, and I think they gave us about an hour to take in Michelangelo's painting of the ceiling, which starts in Genesis and goes all the way through Revelation. It was a little bit overwhelming, but the one thing that really caught me, my attention, was his depiction of God and Adam. They were both straining to connect, but their fingers end up just not quite connecting. They're straining to connect, but his vision of Adam and God's relationship is that they just don't quite connect. And it reminded me of, in Acts, Luke has Paul delivering a sermon or a message in Athens, and he says, from one ancestor God made all nations so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for God and perhaps find God. The image that human beings were created in part to search for God, to grope for God. Last week we talked about a light shining in the darkness, and we use the word grope when we're in the dark, trying to find our way, and perhaps find God. At the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, they've been doing a lot of research the last almost 20 years with the belief that they're discovering that there's even a genetic component deep within us that experiences the need for God, that whether it gets activated or not is a different thing. And thinking about Adam and God trying to connect brought to mind the experience I shared with you last week where God spoke through a song. And I shared with you that as I entered high school, I decided I was a deist. And deists believe that God created a really great world, gave us everything we need to make or break it, and then retired off in the distance. And that was my experience of God, was that he made a great creation, but he was no longer present and wasn't available for any sort of relationship. Richard Rohr founded an organization called the Center for Action and Contemplation, and he puts out a daily meditation every day throughout the year. And recently he reminded me that from his perspective, which I agree with, that who we are, how we treat others, how we behave reflects the God that we know. And that was certainly the case for me back then, that in addition to God being off at a distance, I had good friends, but there was a part of me that always held myself at a distance. There was always this wall, I guess, a fear of vulnerability and connecting at a deeper level for my friends. And so when God strained to reach out to me, it was not only to invite me into a relationship with God, but also encouraging me to let that wall down and connect with the important people in my life. So for 8 years, I trained marriage and family therapist at the Adler University. And so I had to commute from Northwest Indiana into Chicago at least 4 days a week. And so back and forth to the train station, I always passed this church. And on the church's billboard this one year, it read, "If God is distant, guess who moved?" And there was truth to that. I know when I got busy or overwhelmed and stressed, I had a tendency to put God on the back burner. And so maybe the message of the billboard for me was that I needed to shape up. And sometimes that's the case. And it reminded me of my favorite cartoon of all time was a guy named Ziggy. I identify with Ziggy quite a bit. And he regularly went to Hilltop and visited with God. In fact, I had a calendar, 16-month calendar, where each picture each month was some sort of interaction that Ziggy had with God. I was really sorry that I got rid of that. But I did find the one cartoon that came to mind. And so there's a time when God strains that the fingers point at me and telling me that I need to shape up. That was what was on my calendar. I actually found a more ominous one. That's a tick off God telling me to shape up. I like the other one better. So I would pass that billboard about eight times a week. It was up for 6 months or more. And as I started passing it more and more frequently, I found myself really irritated by the billboard. Maybe it was because I didn't need 2 daily reminders to shape up. Maybe it was because they had it up for so long. It's like, don't they have any other spiritual insights beside that one? But I came to realize that my irritation was I didn't find anything inviting about that message. Would I, as a person that needed to shape up once in a while, would I be welcome at that church? Would they show me how to connect with God? Were they inviting me to join their community? I didn't feel any of that for 6 or 8 or 10 months, I passed it twice daily. And I think that's a really crucial difference, that as God strains to connect with us, sometimes the message might be to shape up. But even if the message is to shape up, to me it comes with an invitation. It's not punishing. It comes with an invitation and an opportunity to draw closer to God, to find out what God is about. Last week we did a Lectio Divina about the first chapter of John's Gospel, the Word becoming flesh. And one of the passages that always leapt out at me was that that the Word dwelt among us. And both Hebrew and Greek are metaphorical languages, meaning that behind the word is a word picture. Some of our English words are that, but we've lost the picture a long time ago. And the word picture behind God dwelling amongst us, the word dwelling amongst us, is the word pitched its tent and dwelt amongst us. And I really like that image of the word pitching its tent. And for many, it brought to mind the Exodus, where they journeyed from slavery to the promised land. And whenever they stopped, they pitched a tent and believed that God was in the tent with them. And pitching a tent is an image of God being along with us for the journey. And when they decided not to go into the promised land after all that journey, and they lived a nomadic life for 40 years, and wherever they stopped for a while, they'd pitch a tent. And that's where God was, right in the center of their camp. Now it's interesting, once the people of Israel did come into the promised land and got settled, and life got busier and more comfortable, it's interesting how often we go about distancing ourselves from God. God no longer pitched his tent among them. Instead, they built a temple. That's where God was, had to journey to find him. And the way the temple was designed was really symbolic, I think, of how we distance ourselves from God a lot of times. It was a series of concentric circles, and the far outer circle was for Gentiles who were interested in Judaism. They could come into the temple, but they had to stay on the far inside. And then the next level was for Jewish women, and the next level was for Jewish men, and the next level in was for priests. And then there was the Holy of Holies, where only one priest could go in once a year. And that's where God was. Everyone at a distance. In fact, John the Baptist's father got to be that person that year, and that's how he ended up mute, was that overwhelming experience of being in God's presence. One person once a year. Everybody else had to sit at a distance or had to make the long journey, like from Nazareth to Jerusalem. One of the many ways, I think, that we have a tendency to distance ourselves from God. And yet I think Michelangelo had it right. God is straining to make the connection and to give us that opportunity to know what God is like. And so our Lectio Divina ended up with these words: no one has ever seen God. It's God's only Son who's close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. A light shining in our darkness, we talked about last week, a light guiding our way, but also a light that shines on God and gives us the opportunity to find out what God is like and to build that kind of relationship. And the most important relationships in our lives play a giant role in shaping who we are. God invites us into a relationship that's going to give us the opportunity for God to shape who he'd like us to be. Many times in the contemplative prayer groups I've led over the years, we've had an opportunity to kind of imagine having a conversation with Christ. And many times after that experience, people talk about feeling like Christ is inviting them to follow him. And that they found that both exciting and scary. And I've had that experience myself where I feel like I've gotten this invitation, and it's exciting, but it's also scary, because to follow someone, you don't know for sure where you're going. And so when God strains to connect with us, maybe we have that experience of being exciting yet scary. And so it becomes a bit of a decision. Am I going to respond to that invitation? Am I going to go who knows where? To me, the funny thing about it is that being afraid of going where you don't know where Christ is going to lead brings up what I think is kind of a delusion that we think we know where we're going. We've planned it out. It's kind of like the old John Lennon words, life is what happens when we made other plans. So I'm not sure there's exactly this thing of us knowing exactly where we're going. When I was in college, I kept asking God to use me in some way, lead me someplace. And I had to do that, not knowing where I was going to go. And many years later, I decided I was really grateful that I didn't know where I was going, because at 22 or 21, if God had shown me what I was going to do for the next 40 years, I think I would have run away, like Jonah, in the opposite direction. It's good. I think it was good that it unfolded the way it did. God straining to connect to us is an invitation that implies that God is accessible. That God didn't pitch his tent, the Word didn't pitch his tent for the 3 years that Jesus was in ministry, but that the Word pitched his tent permanently and is accessible for us on our journey through life. There's a spiritual practice called examine, which was developed by Ignatius of Loyola. And I'm going to show you this 4-minute video that tells you a little bit about examine. It's an opportunity or a practice that can enable us to connect with God each day. So I'm going to share that with you and then talk about it a little bit. It worked in warm-up, so I hope it's going to work here.
Is a simple but powerful technique of prayerful reflection. Experience alone does not teach us much. It is when we reflect on our experience that we really begin to learn. The examen is a practice developed by St. Ignatius of Loyola around 500 years ago. It can help us see God's hand at work in our daily lived experience. It is a simple prayer that has the capacity to transform our lives by helping us become more aware. It is best prayed daily. Step 1. Become aware of God's presence. Find a place where you can spend some uninterrupted time. Take a few quiet, slow breaths. Quiet your mind and calm your body, and gently relax into an awareness of God's presence. Imagine God welcoming you. Step 2. Review the day with gratitude. Take some time to think back over the day that has just passed. Ask God to show you the day through God's eyes. In the presence of God, review the day with gratitude. Gratitude is the foundation of our relationship with God. Notice any joys and delights. Focus on the day's gifts. Look at the work you did, the people you interacted with. What did you receive from these people? What did you give them? Pay attention to small things. the food you ate, the sights you saw, and other seemingly small pleasures. God is in the details. Step 3. Review the day again and notice your feelings. Notice moments when you felt fully alive, times when you felt at peace, joyful, happy, comforted, whole, connected, challenged, your best self. Those moments in which you felt close to God. Allow some of these moments to come to mind. These are times of consolation. Choose the moment for which you feel most grateful and stay with it. Savor it. Notice how God might be drawing you to more of those kind of experiences. Take some time to give thanks to God. Now remember anything for which you are less grateful. Experiences that caused you to feel drained of energy, frustrated, irritated, angry, sad, alone, isolated, unaccepted, fragmented, less than your best self. Bring these memories before God and ask God to bring you the healing you need. Step 4. Choose one feature of the day and pray from it. Choose one feature of the day and use it in your prayer. Ask the Holy Spirit to direct you to something during the day that God thinks is particularly important. It may involve a feeling, positive or negative. It may be a significant encounter with another person or a vivid moment of pleasure or peace. It may be something that seems rather insignificant. Look at it. Pray about it. Allow the prayer to arise spontaneously from your heart, whether intercession, praise, repentance, or gratitude. Step 5. Look forward to tomorrow with hope. Look forward to tomorrow. Ask God to give you light for tomorrow's challenges. Pay attention to the feelings that surface as you survey what's coming up. Are you doubtful, cheerful, apprehensive, full of delighted anticipation? Allow these feelings to turn into prayer. What gift do you think you might particularly need for tomorrow? Strength, energy, patience, courage? Ask for that gift. The more you practice the examen, the easier and clearer it will become, shedding light on the path God has laid out before you.
Imagine what it'd be like to spend part of each day, at the end of the day, looking back retrospectively of where God might have been in the day, or when were there moments when it would have been helpful to connect with God, that we needed God. To think about the next day and maybe what God might want us to see the next day or to do the next day, or what we might need from God the next day. What would it be like to regularly connect so that our understanding of God, our understanding of ourselves deepens as time goes on? Examines based on the idea that God is woven into everything. That God isn't far away, like Paul said in his message, but God is very near. It just takes kind of the eyes to see that and to experience it. Celtic Christians called it thin places, the place where the material world and the spiritual world became razor thin, and we could connect with the spiritual world that's present around us. Peterson's translation, a kind of prosaic translation of the Gospels, had this for that passage about God dwelling. Peterson says, if I can find it, No one has ever seen God, not so much as one glimpse. This one-of-a-kind God expression who exists at the very heart of the Father has made God plain as day. Made God plain as day. I told you that the theme of Advent became celebrating Christ's birth so many centuries ago, and also looking forward to the day when Christ comes back. And it's great to be grateful about the past, that it's great to be hopeful about the future. But what about the present? What's the present significance of celebrating Christmas every year? What's it mean for us now? What's it mean for us each year? In family therapy, we have this concept called collapsing time, and what it means is that as people come into therapy, they're either hurting about something in the past and want to talk about that, or they're anxious about something in the future and want to talk about that. But what about right now? The idea of collapsing time is, can we put the future and the past aside for a minute and say, what about right now? You're here with your spouse and you want to work on the relationship. Do we want to spend the hour complaining about the past or worried about the future? Or do we want to do something right now? So what is it about Christmas that in the celebration of Advent that's about the right now for us? Leo Tolstoy, the famous Russian author, didn't just write War and Peace, which many of you might have tried to read, but couldn't get through the 2,000 pages. But he wrote a lot of short stories, and most of his short stories were Christian-oriented. And my favorite is about a shoemaker or a cobbler who's in a little Russian village in the 19th century. And his workshop is a little bit below ground, but he has a window that looks out onto the street, the cobblestone street outside. And it's also where he lives, his living quarters in the back room. And the story begins with Martin's best friend Gregory coming to see him. It's a couple of days before Christmas, and Gregory is inviting him to go together to the Christmas Eve celebration in his village. But Martin doesn't want any part of it. He's not in the mood for Christmas. He's not a bitter old man like Scrooge, but he has no excitement or interest in Christmas this year. You see, his wife and his children died in an influenza epidemic that came through the town a couple of years ago, and since then he doesn't have much energy or interest in anything except fixing his shoes. And later that day, as he's about to close up his shop, a Russian holy man comes in on a pilgrimage, and he has this beautiful leather-bound Bible. But it has some cracks in it, and he asks Martin to repair it. He says, I'll come back in a few weeks and pick it up, but Martin's humbled by this. This is a treasure. And you want this humble cobbler in this little town to repair this Bible. But the pilgrim, the Russian holy man, insists. Well, after dinner, Martin's by the fire, and he decides he's going to look at the Bible. And as he opens it and reads a bit, thumbs through the pages, suddenly has a vision of the risen Christ. He says, Martin, tomorrow I'm going to visit you 3 times. Watch for me. Martin wakes up the next morning a little more excited than he's been in a long time, and he kind of anticipates, a little excited, a little scared. But he's curious, will Christ really visit him 3 times? And as he works on his shoe, he's looking out the window, and sometime in the morning, a wagon goes by filled with lumber, and suddenly the wheel breaks and the lumber falls out, and the driver's thrown from the cart, and Martin rushes out and helps the driver out, and then together they fix the wheel and they replace the lumber, and the man goes on his way. Martin goes back to working on his shoes, but he's looking out the window, and he sees an elderly woman chasing a young boy, beating him with her cane. And he rushes out to find out what's wrong, and he's found out that the starving boy has stolen an apple from this elderly widow who manages to sustain herself on selling apples. And he pays for the apple and makes peace between the two and sends them both on their way. Now it's getting late in the afternoon, and Martin's starting to get discouraged because Christ hasn't shown up. And he's about to close up his shop. Dark has fallen. It's starting to snow. It's snowing heavily. And he looks out, and he sees a young woman with two young children, and they have no coats, and he can tell that they're freezing. And so he brings them into his house, and he feeds them and puts them by the fire. She recently became a widow and is traveling to see her sister. And before she heads out to complete the journey, Martin sees his wife's coat and the coat of his two children, one of the last remembrances of her that he has. And he hesitates a moment, but he gives the coat to the woman and the two children and sends them on their way. Now it's night, and Martin's a little disappointed. Christ said he was going to show up 3 times, but he didn't. But he returns to the Bible, and shortly there he has another vision. Christ says, I did come to you 3 times, Martin. I came in the man who was trapped under his wagon. I came to you with the starving boy and the widow selling apples. I came to you with the young woman and the 2 children traveling to go to live with her sister. Because whenever you care for the least of these, you care for me. The next day, Gregory shows up, not with much hope that Martin's going to join him for the celebration, but he finds a whole new person excited. He says, what are you waiting for? We need to get to the Christmas celebration. We don't want to be late. Now, you could reflect on that story and say, isn't it kind of neat that God sent those 3 situations that Martin could respond to? But when I think about it, I think that was stuff that happened every day. Did God really send those 3 situations, or was the difference that Martin was watching? I can imagine that stuff like that happened every day outside on the street. And I really think the difference was that Martin was watching and started to see God present in the world around him and in the people around him. It's a different kind of seeing, and so when God's light shines in the darkness, I think we begin to see things more the way God sees them. And what a difference in the way that we treat others if we're seeing things the way God sees them. When I think about that, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Field of Dreams, but if you know the story, this farmer builds a baseball field, and dead famous baseball players come from the past and play on the field, but only a few people can see the baseball players, and one of the persons that can't is his brother-in-law who's about to foreclose on their place. Because he built this baseball field and plowed under his corn, he's going to lose his farm. And the farmer's daughter, the other guy's niece, almost chokes to death on a hot dog. And one of the players comes and who's turned out to be a doctor and saves her. And all of a sudden, he turns and says, "When did these baseball players get here?" And of course, we know they were always there. It's just finally he can see them. I think that's a bit the way it is with God. God pitches tent. God is always there. It's just something has to happen for us to see it. Paul goes on to say in his sermon in Athens that as we search for God and perhaps find him, he goes on to say, "Indeed, God is not far away from each of us. For in God we live and move and have our being." In God we live and move and have our being. God, in his view, is kind of our environment. Scientists tell us that fish don't know that they swim in water. I want to know how scientists know that. Did they crack the dolphin language or something? But when I thought about it, we don't really know that we live in air. I mean, oxygen was only discovered about 150 years ago. And we exist without really, we're told by scientists that we live in air, but it's just our environment. And here Paul is saying, geez, there's this opportunity for us to live in God's environment. What would that be like? When I think of seeing differently, I think of a woman at church who was the director of Christian education and also eventually became the parish nurse as she got older. And she had this amazing ability to look at people and realize the ones that needed encouragement or needed to be talked to or found out how they're doing. I tend to be a focused person, and my office was in the church, and I'd walk down the hallway with a purpose, and I didn't notice things, but she'd be there and she'd be noticing all sorts of things. And it was amazing how often she came up and said something to me, which is exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. When I was the director of a Samaritan Counseling Center, we brought Richard Foster and James Bryan Smith, who created a group spiritual formation program called Renovari. We brought them to Indiana. And I watched as Richard Foster would sit at the back. We had about 160 people attend it. And he'd look around, and he picked out 5 or 6 people that he recognized was in some kind of spiritual need. And then he would go and talk to them during breaks and things. And it was amazing how somehow he could pick up with that kind of vision somebody that was really hurting, somebody that was really lonely, somebody that really needed something, because he had a sensitivity that came in the relationship that he built with God. Ooh, I better hurry. Let's take just a moment for a brief contemplative practice. This is called imagining the Scripture, and it can be done a couple ways. One is kind of imagining each of the characters in the Scripture, or imagining ourselves in the Scripture, and that's what we're going to try today, is imagining ourselves at the birth of Christ. So if you would close your eyes and get as comfortable as you can and take some deep breaths. And I want you to picture yourself in Bethlehem. You're a shopkeeper, you sell your wares. And it's a busy time in in Bethlehem rather. People are coming in for the census, and so you have your wares on the street and you spend all day into the evening selling your wares. It's a clear evening, the stars are out and bright. And you're about to put away your wares for tomorrow. When you're surprised to see a group of shepherds racing into town right past where you're standing. What are they doing there? Why aren't they in the fields? Why have the lowest people in the social structure come into town? What are they hurrying to see? You're curious, so you decide to follow them through the ways and the byways of Bethlehem, dimly lit by flickering torches. You have to hustle a bit to keep up with them. Where are they going? Why are they so excited? And then they come toward the outside of town and you see them enter a cave just outside the last homes. And curious, you follow them into the cave. And you're surprised to see there a woman and a newborn child. One by one, the shepherds go up to the manger and they share something with Mary and Joseph. And you hear bits and pieces about how the angels told them that Christ was born. How do you react to that? Do you believe it? Are you excited? A little bit scared? Does it seem strange that Christ would come in this way and to these shepherds? You decide to go forward and gaze at the baby. What do you want to say to the baby or to Mary or Joseph? As you gaze on the baby, what has Christ meant to your life? What do you want to share this morning at the manger? you notice that others are waiting to come to the manger, and so it's your time to step away. But imagine yourself leaving and walking through town to return to your home. What has it meant for Christ to be present in your life? When you're ready, you can open your eyes and return to the group. That little meditation was inspired by a movie called Mr. Kruger's Christmas. I don't know if it was a made-for-TV movie. You hardly ever see it. But Jimmy Stewart plays an elderly widower. And over time, you find out what Christmas means to him and what his relationship with Christ has meant to his life. It's a really neat little movie if you can find it somewhere. Okay. Let me close with a couple things. The time goes by so fast for me. I don't know if it did for you. This is a meditation called Virgin Birth by Joy Cowley, and it goes like this. We have within us a virgin place, a holy space which belongs to God alone. We know it by its hunger. We name it by its need. The space which will not be touched by the people we love or the things we gather or the positions that we hold. We have within us a growing place, an eternal space that exists for truth, where the love of God overcomes us, where the life of God fills us, the Emmanuel space where we conceive and become pregnant of the Holy One, and day by day give birth to Christ in the world. As Christ showed us, plain as day, what God is like, the most dominant theme is that God is compassionate. The word that Jesus uses for compassion is a form of the word womb, W-O-M-B, wombishness, nourishing, nurturing. The compassionate God invites us in a relationship that'll nourish and nurture us like the womb does before we were born. And so each Christmas, I think, we're reinvited into a relationship with God that is nurturing and nourishing, and where we experience all the fullness of God's love. In counseling, we have this concept that's gotten really popular in recent years, strong research for it, called attachment. And the idea is, the hope is that we have a secure attachment with people that we can count on, rather than an anxious attachment where we worry whether we can count on this, whether we're going to get the love that we need. And a secure attachment has two things: a safe haven, a place where it's a port in a storm where we can go and get supported and loved and refreshed and healed, and a secure base, a place that launches us into the world with a secure knowledge that we're loved. And what a difference it is, I think, when we go out into the world knowing that we're loved, knowing that we're accepted, knowing that we're forgiven, knowing that we're valued. And I think we approach the world a little bit differently when we go out on those mornings versus not knowing whether we're loved, wondering if we're accepted, wondering if we're in need of forgiveness. God is a safe haven and a secure base to launch us. Joy talks about day by day giving birth to Christ in the world. And Paul said that that's the purpose of the spiritual journey, is that we become Christ-like over time. And let me close with this. William Blake was a poet in the late 1700s, and he's often quoted with this quote, "We are put on earth for a little space that we might learn to bear the beams of love." That we might learn to bear the beams of love. I've seen it quoted many, many times. I only learned recently what the context of the poem is. Blake was a relentless critic of the British society that he lived in. And that quote actually comes from a poem he called The Black Boy. Because England at the time was very active, became wealthy off the slave trade, which he found abhorrent. And the point of his poem is that the skin of the black boy might be dark, but he bears the beams of love, that he's loved and valued just as much by God as a person in British society. Pretty radical thinking for the time. But his point is that if Christ brought the light into the world, we're called to become beams of light that bring God's love into the world. Again, I love how she puts it, become pregnant with the Holy One, and every day give birth to Christ in the world. And so the light is an invitation for us to draw into closer relationship with God. But it's also a call or an invitation to receive the light, to hear the call, become the light, and become light bearers in the darkness of this world. And so in our remaining few moments, if you have any questions or comments, we have just a couple more minutes. But that's what I'm going to leave you with today, that the light shining in the darkness calls us to become beams of light, bringing Christ's light into the world.
Thank you so much for your talk. I love the thing on Da Vinci, and I've seen it so many times, and it struck me when I looked at the fingers. The finger of God is welcoming and coming down from heaven. The finger of man is like this, and he has to do like this to touch God. So I mean, in other words, it's a decision that man has to make.
That's a great way to put it, and you know, again, I don't think most of the time it's God's judgment, but rather opportunity. And you know, I think as I look back, the times I regret the most is when I missed opportunity. And it's sad to kind of watch opportunity go right by. Go ahead. So I was asked to let's see. So I'm a retired marriage and family therapist, but I do with Centus, I function as a spiritual director, doing the kind of group experiences I did in the fall, or spiritual direction is something that can be done individually, where someone comes about once a month and we do sort of like the examine to explore where God is in the person's life right then. So if you ever want to contact me around spiritual direction, that's my information. I'm going to leave. The church is going to post something with has the readings that I did the 2 weeks, has this information, has the link to examine the examine video if you'd like to review that, and some other things you might meditate on during Advent. So hopefully the next week that'll get posted if you'd like that information. Any final questions or comments? Well, thank you for your attention these 2 weeks. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mark.
I tried to give evaluation forms as people came in. If you could fill them out and just leave them on this back pew, that would be great. And if you didn't get one, come see me. I have pens, and it helps us with our programming as we move forward if you give honest feedback of what you liked, what you didn't like, and maybe ideas for future topics. Thank you.